Hope alumni who graduated with a major in history and a passion for French, for everything French, right? In March of 2016, Barbara contacted Hope College. She offered to donate about 1,000 books, French books, or books on France, right? From our own collection to the Hope Library. And to thank Barbara for this generous gift, we invited her to talk to us about how she got this collection, how she got this passion, and also how she was able to combine these two passions of her, history and French, and lead a very rich and successful life, and rich meaning living life to the fullest, right? So I'm just going to give you an idea of her accomplishments, and it's going to be long because there's a long list. I'm not going to list everything though, yes, so starting with her bachelor's degree that she got from Hope College, she then received a law degree from the University of Michigan. And in her distinguished career afterwards, she has served in various positions in Washington, D.C. and California. From 1986 to 1989, she was a senior counsel for the Federal Home Loan Bank Board and the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation. From 1989 to 1992, she was the general counsel for the U.S. House of Representatives, the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, and I'm hoping that I'm describing that correctly. In 2000, she took a position as corporate counsel for an internet media and technology company in San Francisco. She returned to Washington, D.C., and the following year to serve as Assistant Sergeant at Arms in Information Technology for the U.S. Senate. And so you may explain what that consists of. She then was named Assistant Secretary of the United States Senate from 2001 to 2002. From 2003 to 2005, she moved back to California to become the Chief Information Officer of the California Department of Transportation. And she's now a consultant and project manager providing advice and support for complex projects. I want also to mention a few of the honors and appointments that Barbara Timmer received throughout her career. She was elected Executive Vice President of the National Organization for Women in 1982-84. In 1990, she was the recipient of the National Affordable Housing Award, and in 1993, she received the award of the Outstanding Woman Award from the Young Women's Christian Association in New York. And last but not least, she received the Distinguished Alumni Award from Hope College in 2003. So this is just a brief list of what she has accomplished throughout her career. We'll take questions after the talk, right? So Barbara will take questions. And then there will be a short moment for Michael Donato, who is our librarian from the Hope Library, who's going to say a few words about the collection of books that Barbara has donated to Hope College. And then free books will be given away, but I think people have already helped themselves. And so you can go back to these books and take what you want to take with you. You're welcome to it. And then there is a reception, a small reception at the end of the talk. And there is a little bit of food, French food. We tried to make it French. We have the macaron. So at least we have that. And the cheese, right? And everyone is welcome to stay afterwards. And so we can talk to Barbara. So please help me to welcome Barbara Timmer.
Thank you, Professor Hammond-Porter. Honor to be asked. And I don't know if they're here, but Professor Jean Petit, I don't know, Lauren James, Gloria Tsing, Brigitte showed me the resumes of some of the other people in the French department, and like every Hope student who has graduated and has lived for a while, we all want to come back, re-enroll, and try again. And I want to thank some of my friends, my sisters from Hope College who are here. Catherine fondly refers to them as the cronies. My friends from Hope Church, the Warm Friend, other friends of mine from Hope College, I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming. It was not a command performance, but trust me, it feels good to see familiar faces. Bridget's beautiful poster said I would speak about my lifelong love of French and how my passion for history and French have shaped both my professional and personal life. And when I was talking to Brigitte, she did use the word passion several times and asked me, she said students would be interested if I was passionate about what I do. I think you can judge for yourself, but I think my answer is I am. Come in. There are three kind of parts to my talk, and I want to tell you I'm a lawyer, as Brigitte said, and I'm going to talk for a bit, and lawyers are used to trying to persuade, so that's probably what I'll do a little bit of. And lawyers like to use evidence, so I have some evidence with me, some books, and then I have a warning. On September 11th, I was in the Capitol. My office was on the third floor facing the mall, and the Capitol Hill Police, we have our own police force, went running through the building saying, get out, there's a plane headed this way. That the plane that those brave people took down in Pennsylvania was the plane headed for the Capitol. And only by accident was that plane 45 minutes late leaving LaGuardia Airport, which is why it was still in the air and the people on board knew that the hijackers were lying. So they took the plane down, and otherwise I would have been in the Capitol. The Capitol, as you may know, is built out of cast iron. It would have shattered like glass. And to this day, every September 11th, I think to myself that I'm fortunate to be here, but I wanted you to know that that's where a history degree might get you. It's not all easy being an historian. Three parts of my talk, short little part on sort of the purpose of college, which every alumni, trust me, wants to tell you. Number two, short little part on me. And then number three, I'm going to talk about historians and French historians and books. First of all, and I say this all the time, if you learn how to read and write critically and analytically at Hope College, you can do anything. And I was fortunate. Things that get on your resume are the good things. The things that you're not quite as successful at doing don't get on your resume. I did go to graduate school in history a little while after Hope, and I got down to North Carolina and found out that my Hope College background had really prepared me to be in a graduate program in history like students from a lot of other colleges with much more familiar names. So if you can read and write critically and analytically, you can do anything. Number two, when we immerse ourselves in the outside world, in other cultures, in other times, in other languages, we're better people. Number three, democracy needs the humanities. That's a whole separate talk. And when you have somebody here to talk about it, start with this book, Martha Nussbaum's Not-for-Profit, Why Democracy Needs the Humanities. Okay. Number four. Another title for this talk could be Read Books. I asked some friends of mine what I should say today, and one of them said, tell them to read books. Another one, who is an artist, said, tell them not to just read books, do art. Got a lot of advice. I wanted to tell you why I'm doing what I do. That is, why I went to Washington, why I worked at the jobs I did. It was because of how I was raised, my family, my churches, Hope College. And I gradually wanted to be where decisions were made about who gets what. To me, that's what justice comes down to. Decisions about who gets what. And you could do another whole talk on what is justice. And I would suggest starting with someone whose books I don't have here, they're in LA, John Rawls, who says he did this thought experiment where he had people select the kind of society they wanted to have if, when they woke up, they would not know what position they personally occupied. And, interestingly enough, equal basic rights, equality of opportunity, promoting the interests of the least advantaged. And I've taken Rawls to heart. I thought that he's very articulate about it, but to me, that was the same as sort of how I was raised. And Bill Clinton gave him an award in 1999 for, as Clinton said, helping a whole generation of learned Americans revive their faith in democracy itself. A constant test, I'll say. I'm thankful that I was here in the 60s, during the civil rights movement, the women's movements, the feminist movements, the ongoing struggle for LGBT equality. Lucky for you, they're still going on. And a little bit of personal history. My parents met here. My mother loved everything French from the time she was little. I think she just was attracted to the culture, the music, the art, the language. She came here. She had a fabulous French professor who encouraged her. I don't know if she ever thought she would go there, but my father, who was in the Air Force, we traveled all over the world, came home one day when I was in 8th grade and said, our next assignment's in Paris, France. And we were there for 4 years. That's where I went to high school. And to this day, I feel at home walking around Paris. Now we go quite often, every year or two, staying usually long enough to rent an apartment, and we're thinking about even staying longer times now. And when I go, I like to spend 2 weeks with classes at the Alliance Française first. It brings me back up to a little bit of French. It reminds me of how old most people are at the Alliance Française. They usually raise the median age by a decade or two. But it's a way of immersion, and it's a structure in the mornings. And then I drew on my little thing, a little heart. Yeah, I love French. Here in the United States, I try to listen to French every day. I have French podcasts sometimes about French news. There's a morning show I usually listen to, but also listening to world events from another perspective is so different. Broader, deeper, more expansive. Debates sound to me more substantive. Facts are incredibly important. There are historical currents that I heard about before they were in the New York Times even, because I was listening to French podcasts. And there's also French music and French television, and there's a great new series called The Tunnel, a murder mystery, not high class, but fabulous. And I read French magazines. And these are the magazines that not everybody thinks are the most academic. Point de Vue and Paris Match. I think they're great, okay? Catherine thinks I look at them for the pictures. Kings, queens, princes, princesses, rich socialites, parties. Of course not. I look for the deep political articles. First choice for the French students. And I always look to see who's on the cover. There are favorites. The Queen of the Netherlands is a current favorite. She's fabulous. Brazilian, learned Dutch. The Dutch people love her. I think she's great too. She's sad on this cover because her father had died. He was not allowed to come to the wedding. You'll have to find out yourself why. Mystery. I love French movies. There should be a French, is there a French film festival here?
In spring, in February.
And so what movies did you have the last time?
We had a movie, let's see.
Okay, I won't put you on the spot, but I will say there are some great French movies. The French, I believe, have more movie theaters per capita than any country. On any street, you'll find a little movie theater, and you might find another one across the street and down in the basement. The great black and white classics I love. There's La Silence de la Mer, you know that movie? A father and daughter during World War II. Their home is taken over by the Germans, and a German officer is bivouacked there. I forget the word. And he loves all things French, and he's met with silence while he lives there with the father and daughter, and more happens. When I'm in Paris, after a little while, I go to the French movies that don't have subtitles. And I know I don't understand everything. It can be a risky business. Last fall, I went to a very popular French movie, a family around dinner just yelling at each other for 2 hours. And I thought I was picking up quite a bit. And on the way out of the theater, I said to my friend Anne, "So, did he die at the concert?" And my friend Anne said, "Oh, he died of cancer." Oh, I said, "Oh, cancer." Oh, it's like, cancer. You know, I love, you know, and she didn't sort of bat an eyelash. She didn't look at me like, wow, you missed the point of that relationship. But the point is, I went. So, and the other point is, cancer. All right, time to talk about books and historians. But I did want to tell you that I get 70% of some things, 80% of some things, you know. I'm going to talk about 4 historians. Anne Sinclair, who's a French journalist whose book about her grandfather just came out. Johann Huizinga, who's a Dutch historian who wrote about French history. Marc Bloch, who's a French historian who wrote about history itself, how to write history. And Leila Slimani, who is a younger, everyone is, French journalist and writer who writes contemporary personal histories and won the 2016 Prix Goncourt. Anne Sinclair, as I said, was a French television anchorwoman. She married a French politician. They're not married anymore. She's now another story. She's now the director of the French version of the Huffington Post. Very, very sharp. Her recent book, 21 Rue La Boétie, is about her grandfather, Paul Rosenberg, who was one of the most famous art dealers at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century, representing Braque, Monet, Van Gogh, Picasso, Degas, Renoir. And it's about her tracking down the story of how her grandfather's paintings were confiscated during World War II. And here's one of the things she says, my own translation. The French police furnished the trucks, the Gestapo the men. The most important paintings from the most important collections were taken to the German embassy in Paris. This book, I'm telling you, it reads just like even with 80%, it reads like a mystery. And Catherine would say, I would go, oh, and Catherine would say, has the book been translated? It includes amazing stories of how the artists whose names we all know, who were alive then, who lived in France, how they lived through World War II. The bravery of some of them, the bravery of some French citizens and dealers, the greed and collaboration of others. She looked at original letters. She buried herself in the archives of museums and art dealers. When she would read an address, she would visit the location. Perfect example of a great history book. Even another reason it's a great history book is, as she says at the end, when she started to write a different book. And what she found led her in this direction. As an example, Picasso, who was a close friend of her grandfather, they even lived in the same building for a number of years. Her grandfather represented Picasso. They had a very close relationship. She discovers during her research that Picasso wrote in the margin, in his own handwriting, in the margin of his identity papers, "I say on my honor, I'm not Jewish," under the law of June 2nd, 1941. One of the laws against Jews passed by the Vichy government and the Nazis that was used to take away her grandfather's paintings. She finds that as she's doing her research. You may remember some of us may remember the movie The Train. Others might remember the movie The Monument Men. But The Train was a 1964 movie about a train full of confiscated art that was going to Germany as the war was collapsing, and how French resistance fighters stopped the train. Whose grandson was one of the French resistance fighters? Paul Rosenberg's. Alexander Rosenberg. Paul Rosenberg spent the last years of his life still looking for the paintings that had been stolen. He would read auction catalogs. He would see dealers' articles, and he confronted them, because on the back of the paintings would be the initials of his gallery. Sinclair went into the archives of some of the great museums in Paris. And what did she find? I'm translating. The French language is so beautiful, but I'm translating. Here she says, "It's hard for me to say, but I must. Even today, in the deep storage spaces of the most prestigious French museums are paintings that aren't identified, haven't been reclaimed, whose owners disappeared in concentration camps. Their families could be found if the archives were really opened and searched. It's there in the records. The museums aren't hiding the information, they just aren't looking. Ils attendent le retour de ceux qui ne reviendront pas. They're waiting for people who will never return." Two more books. This is one I'm in the middle of. It's a great airplane book because it's lightweight and it's a paperback. And it's a book I've always wanted to read. It's The Waning of the Middle Ages by Johann Huizinga. And the subtitle is A Study of the Forms of Life, Thought, and Art in France and the Netherlands in the Dawn of the Renaissance. I felt like that was like just the perfect combination of things to read about. And while I was in a secondhand bookstore, they're all disappearing, but anyway, while I was in a secondhand bookstore, what did I find? This book, Papers Delivered to the Johann Huizinga Conference in Groningen, December 1972. I wonder how many of these were printed. And I feel like I found it. So now they will live together. But this is the travel one. It's lighter. I had a great course at Hope in the Middle Ages. And I can't believe it, but this is one of the books I'm giving away. But I realized this must have been a different one because it doesn't appear to be opened. Probably I had another one that's very much opened and used. But this book, I'll just tell you, it is so well written, just classic history. It's expansive, exhaustive, exhilarating. I just picked out all these quotes I was going to read out loud. There's this emphasis on violence, on love, on death, and chivalry, and there's old French poetry, which he says in footnotes, you know, he does translate some of it in footnotes, but the old French is fun to kind of try to parse out. He was a professor at the University of Leiden, starting in 1915. He taught there until the university was closed under Nazi occupation. In 1942, he spoke out critically about the occupying forces, comments that were consistent with his studies and writings about fascism from the 1930s. From then until his death in 1945, he was held in detention by the Nazis, and he died in detention weeks before the Nazi rule collapsed. Johann Huizinga was an historian. He wrote beautifully, he wrote in depth, critically, analytically, and his writing propelled him into history itself. In this book has essays in French and English, but most of them appear to me to be German or Dutch. But in one of the French essays, the author says that he became an historian after he read Huizinga's book. That's how beautiful it was. Kelly Jacobsma, who's not here, but is represented by Michael, shared the planned content of these courses that are going to be offered now, called Paris Stories. Are any of you involved in taking any of those courses? Oh my goodness. Paris Stories. Please go online. Oh.
Well, I teach them.
There you go. Well, let me say, they look fabulous. I reread the descriptions. I thought to myself, am I here long enough? Can they be audited? I mean, they really look great. I mean, Paris, the city of light, the city of darker images, colonial histories, terrorist attacks, the city of great revolutions and great artists, burdened by racial profiling, burdened by discrimination. Paris, where history is just constantly meeting and grappling with, I would say, the future, but I think it's with the present. In this Paris Stories course list, I read there will be opportunities for seminar studies, and of course, as an alum, I feel perfectly free to give you suggestions. And a perfect choice would be the French historian Marc Bloch, who wrote, what I really like to do is get a book in French and then try to find it in English, so that I really know what it says. But also because translation, as you know, is an art in and of itself. And I might say that in this book here, The Waning of the Middle Ages, it has been translated in French as decline. It's been translated in Dutch. The word can also be called autumn. So anyway, translation. So, The Historian's Craft by Marc Bloch and Apologie pour l'histoire ou métier d'historien. Marc Bloch was born in 1886 in Lyon, and he's been called one of the greatest historians of recent times. He was an Alsatian Jew from an academic family in Paris, deeply affected in his youth by the Dreyfus affair. He fought in the trenches of World War I for 4 years and lived. In 1919, he became lecturer in medieval history at Strasbourg University, and then he was called to the University of Paris in 1936 as the professor of economic history. In 1939, France declared war on Germany after Germany's invasion and occupation of Poland. As France mobilized its troops, Marc Bloch left his position at the Sorbonne and took up his reserve status as a captain in the French army at the age of 52, father of 6 children. He was encouraged by the time by his colleagues at the universities in France and abroad to leave the country. He said it was his personal obligation to stay and stand for the moral imperative. And here's what he said. I was born in France. I have drunk the waters of her culture. I have made her past my own. I breathe freely only in her climate, and I have done my best with others to defend her interests. Bloch joined the French resistance in late 1942, driven by patriotism, identification with his Jewish roots, and a conception of France as the champion of liberty. He was captured in Lyon by the Vichy police in March 1944 and turned over to the Gestapo. He was imprisoned and tortured at the Gestapo headquarters by Klaus Barbie, a name you may be familiar with. And then, on the night of June 16th, 1944, 10 days after D-Day, he was among 28 resistance prisoners taken by German troops in a camionnette, an open, like, military truck, along the Saône River. Heart surgeon in the room? Okay. Shortly after 10 p.m., in a meadow surrounded by high bushes, Bloch was executed by firing squad, one of the first group of 4 handcuffed in pairs to face the machine gun. The following day, the bodies were found, and today there's a memorial in the meadow where they were killed. As he had spent his final days in prison, actually, the book was completed posthumously. And it's another study and talk about history to think of what does it mean if a book is not completed by an author. Anyway, Marc Bloch was another historian who has become part of history. And this is what we're called to do, as Huizinga was called to do, as Bloch was called to do. Historians are called upon to step into the future. One last book. And this is just a terrific book that a French friend of mine sent. It's called The Devil is in the Details. Leila Slimani, she, in the description you have of the course, the Paris stories, there's a lot of talk, all these buzzwords, cultural identity and national identity and everything. And of course, that's the subject for more than one series of courses. She got, as I said, the Goncourt Prize in 2016. The French love to read. They have all kinds of literary prizes. Every fall it's called La Rentrée, when people come back and books are published and they fly off the shelves. This has 6 petits bijoux, 6 little jewels of stories, including her own response to the Bataclan nightclub massacre. She came to Paris when she was 18 from Rabat, from Morocco, studied at Sciences Po, became a journalist for Jeune Afrique, and I would love to read you pages of this because it's just so beautiful. But I'll just say that there's a thing in here. I'll just try to slightly translate this. I was born in Morocco. I grew up Muslim, and every year we celebrated Christmas in a huge house in the country. You know how when you're little, every house is huge. At the table, there were all the religions and all the generations, and it was quite striking, actually, she said. Think about this. During the Second World War, my uncle was a Jewish child hidden in a village by French resistance fighters who protected him. My grandmother from Alsace-Lorraine was hidden in Switzerland to protect her. My grandfather, she said, was Muslim and Algerian and was an officer in the colonial French army. But that night, on Christmas night, We all ate the same meal. It wasn't a question of religions, beliefs, or nationality. My grandfather, who was very, very religious, or practicing, I would say, didn't see a contradiction between celebrating Ramadan and disguising himself as Father Noel. Certainly, she says, there were heated discussions. Actually, it's almost like fiery discussions. There were tears, there were cries, there was crying, but no one got up from the table. We were together and we stayed together. And then she says, Je suis l'enfant de tous ces étrangers et je suis française. Je suis une immigrée, une Parisienne, une femme libre, persuaded that you can affirm yourself without denying others. What kind of world does she want? She says she would like it to be a place where we are conscious of the privilege we have of being together in a world that's trying to drive us apart, where there are forces trying to drive us apart. I would say this is really... So, to sum up one part of this, books don't really change the world. As she says, it's readers who change the world. And there's a French novelist, someone I don't find personally my kind of person, but a guy named Holbeck, who says, with sort of nonchalance at some point said it in an interview, because he got a prize too, books don't really change the world. She says, I rest persuaded that readers, they can. And I believe she's right. So here is what you have to do. Probably wondering, what's my assignment? And it's all of our assignment. Will we take our studies, our reading, our writing, your professors' encouragement, your degrees? Will you change history? Will you become intimately involved with politics? School board, Hope College, little circles of disruption. Will we get constantly beyond our privilege, our good fortune, our security? Catherine and I were in Paris the night of the Bataclan massacre. We were at a restaurant, not one of the restaurants that was attacked. So the love of France and French, just like the love of history, it can lead you to the edges of danger. And you have to ask yourself, is that what you're willing to do? Because that's what we're called to do. Will you be listening to French every day? J'espère. Or living in another country? Shouldn't you, right now, be packing for Paris? Start now. And we are starting now. I got a pair of shoes at Boers, just in case, that I may need there. We're going to be in Paris in January and February, and I hope also in May when you come. And if you're there, we'll take you to a favorite place, or Catherine will take you through a museum the way somebody else might not. I am going to be taking a writing course because I love reading and listening, but I'm always afraid to write and talk. And maybe you'll come and do the same thing. And the thing about writing is, and this is a little footnote, I don't care what language you're writing in. Writing is key to your future. It's key to your future as professionals, whatever. And 2 Sundays ago, I think, in the New York Times, you know how in the Sunday business section they always interview a CEO. And the CEO was asked, it's a big internet company, and he said, he was asked, what do you look for? And he said, our top hiring criterion, in addition to having the skills to do the job, is, are you a great writer? You have to be a great writer to work here in every single position because the majority of our communication is written. And we like long-form writing where people really think through an idea and present it. You know the difference between books and posts and tweets and Instagrams and whatever. There's nothing instant in a book. You probably know the scientific studies about the difference between what happens and where in your brain when you read a book and what happens when you are looking at words on a screen. Even your longevity is now related to how many hours a week you read an actual book. Fortunately, I think 2 hours, so I think you're... So, finishing. Learn how to read and write. Immerse yourselves outside this current world, your privileged, sheltered, wonderful, privileged world here at Hope College. Immerse yourself in other times, in other languages. I'd say French. And 3, being an historian is a calling and a discipline. And learning a language, learning French, loving and learning French, is a joy and really never ending. Working for a better world is what we're all called to do. Well, thank you very much for listening. Students have first choice at the magazines, and anyone can take books home. Thank you. Are there questions? Bon. Are there any students that have questions? Oui.
Have you written, I'm sorry, my name's Aimee. I'm a senior year here
Okay.
at Hope.
Okay, cool.
I'm studying biology and French. My question is, have you written or are planning to write any books yourself?
You know, very good question. Aimee, is it? Merci. Great major. Wow. Double major. Okay. My writing has been boringly legal. I say that with, on the one hand, some pride, and on the other hand, some awkwardness. If you want to read the Financial Institution Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act of 1989, which I know you don't want to, and I don't blame you. However, FIREA restructured the entire banking industry after the collapse of the savings and loan industry in 1986. And when we passed that law, 350 pages, you know, awkwardly, I wrote that, and I'm very proud of it. It's not a page turner. What's that? Oh, Catherine reminds me. Catherine's an art historian. She, if you look under Catherine Glynn, G-L-Y-N-N, her maiden name, you'll see 4 pages of things she's written, and I'm now her editor. Because lawyers like very direct sentences, you know, subject, verb, direct object, and art historians, which is great. Art historians, you know, they love clauses. So it's a good writing team, but that's the kind of writing I've done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, sorry. Student with questions. No, this is your chance. No. Yes.
So, where are you living now?
And tell me your first name again.
Sorry, Allie, yeah.
Allie was in Washington for the march in January. We had a great time. That was cool. Question I forgot.
Where are you living now?
Winters in Los Angeles, summers Western Michigan.
And some months in Paris?
Yes,
Why not?
yes,
Cool.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I can't call on Dan George, but Mary did tell me to say Mary George was my roommate at Hope, and she's here. She did tell me to say that you cannot have any books, even the ones in English. If you come up here, I have been instructed to walk over here and just...
Yes, I have first dibs.
shit. Mary knew that.
Is that sexist?
What's that?
That you're preventing a man?
No, that's trying to keep my roommate happy. Dan.
Think about not teaching cursive in schooling.
I think it's a mistake. There are other studies that talk about the hand-eye coordination that cursive involves and where that is, the little things that light up, in parts of your brain. And I think cursive writing should be taught, and that's a very good question, because for the French, who was I just pointing out that book about? The Dumas. For the French, penmanship is a very big indicator of quality, your personal quality. Sometimes they go overboard and get into the, like, what's your horoscope kind of thing, end of it. True. But for the French, penmanship is really important, and you can kind of, after you look at French kids, after you look at their writing, you can kind of tell. I see some people nodding. You can kind of tell good French cursive writing. So I think it should be taught. And I've got a family friend who thinks, oh, why don't we just go to block letters? Who needs it? I think it's an important skill.
Hi, I'm Brenda.
Hi, Brenda.
I'm English literature and French double major.
Great.
Why did you decide to go to law school?
Why did I decide to go to law school? When I was a senior, I was in Voorhees. And one day, Saturday morning or something, I could see out the third floor window that there were these people going up the outside steps at Voorhees, at Graves. And I asked somebody what they were doing. They said they're going to take the LSAT. And I thought, oh, Perry Mason. Oh, man. Some of you don't even know who Perry Mason was. But I didn't know any real lawyers, but I knew Perry Mason. And Perry Mason wanted to do justice and the right thing. And I remember thinking, I was afraid. I was afraid that that's not what girls did. So I went to graduate school in history and taught history out of community college in California and got married. But in my heart, I wanted to be a lawyer. So I took the LSAT. I was out in the desert in Northern California. I drove a couple hours to Reno, took the LSAT, and I'd always wanted to go to Ann Arbor because my roommate Mary, who was a year ahead of me at Hope, she had good stories about Ann Arbor. A lot of studying was done, I'm sure. But my attraction to Ann Arbor was it just seemed like the coolest place. So I applied to Ann Arbor and went to law school, and I love being a lawyer. I love being a lawyer. And I think I came home the first Christmas, and my parents by then had retired in Holland. My father went to work at Hope College. And we were sitting around the dinner table at Christmas, and one of my brothers said to me, so why did you go to, what are you learning in law school? And I thought, God, my head was swimming, and I said, I think they're teaching us how to argue. And my brother said, you didn't have to go to law school for that. I'm thinking, I didn't think that was a compliment, but anyway, it is a way of thinking, and it fit in with my heart in terms of advocacy. And I learned when I was in law school, I kind of divided the world into people who like to help other people and are involved in service activities and do things like Women in Transition, which is a fabulous organization, and then people who go out and go to the march with a sign and try to just change everything. And I thought, ooh, I'm going to be in that group. But both groups are incredibly necessary, and I salute the ones that are providing actual services to people. I just think that takes a lot of you know, patience and love and kindness. A little less arguing. So, all right, what's another one? Yes,
I'm Emma, I'm International Studies and French major.
good. Médecins sans frontières. You should all, there's the biology and French person. That's where you should be. Yeah.
How did you balance your professional life as a lawyer and also foster your love for French?
You do some when you can, and I mean, you know, those how do you balance questions, you should probably honestly always say, trying my hardest, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, you know. It depends on what the choices you make about your free time. I know I miss a lot of good things that are on television. I didn't miss Fargo. But I know I miss a lot of good things on television. I know I miss, on the other hand, I know I see some great stuff. And I read some great stuff. So you make choices. And I think that's how you balance. You just make choices. And I'm just hoping for a 4th season of Fargo.
So, government work is not the most traditional or necessarily obvious social justice path to our students,
Ooh.
perhaps. So I'm interested how you came to work in the government, and maybe you could give us all back a little bit of.
What was the first part of your question? It's not the most obvious what?
It's not necessarily the most obvious social justice interested law
Wow.
path.
I think,
Think of
wow.
NGOs and people who work, I don't know, so maybe you could give us some of your
Okay.
enthusiasm.
First of all, I think it's the highest calling. I think politicians who run out there and put themselves up for constant, as Hamlet, somebody might say, slings and arrows, I don't know if I'm saying it right, are the bravest people I know. They're out there making decisions all the time and criticized for every single decision, and they are trying to do what they think is right. My good friend Audrey is sitting here looking for her phone. So I would say, here's what I did. And I don't say to everyone to follow this. I went to Washington. I got my law degree. I came to Western Michigan. I started with a firm doing litigation. I loved litigation. But about 2 or 3 years in, I went to Washington on a march. And I came back and I thought, wow, why aren't I in Washington? So I thought, oh. And then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to decide to go. So I thought, okay, so I'll decide to go. I talked to my law firm. I tried to do a very smooth transition because I wanted everyone to be happy, and there were some family friends at the law firm, so we divided out the cases, and I settled some cases, and I took my time, but I went to Washington without a job. And, so I wouldn't suggest that to everyone. On the other hand, why not? And then I thought, I'll bet I want to go to the Federal Trade Commission, because the Federal Trade Commission does litigation against big companies that have monopolistic practices. And I thought, that's what they need. They need a litigation lawyer. And as I was walking around the boring, gray hallways of the Federal Trade Commission, cavernous gray hallways where no busyness seemed to be happening, I would go to the House of Representatives, and I'd go to the Senate, and I'd go to the Capitol, and that was a lot of scurrying around. And so then I thought, actually, probably that's where I want to work. So I started just figuring out how to job hunt, which I did. And I also was careful about for whom and what I was looking for. I wanted to work for something I was proud of, a person I would be proud of. an elected person, because it's elected people who hire you for either their staff or the committees or subcommittees. And I just kept going, and every couple of weeks I would, and I would ask someone for recommendations, and I'd get another name, and finally I was talking with somebody, and they said, oh, well, so-and-so has a job opening. And I thought, God, I was just at so-and-so's office. Why didn't they tell me? So I went back over to the House of Representatives, and I went in and kind of just as if I was casually walking by the building. And I said to this person who later became my staff director, I said, Peter, I understand there's a job opening for a counsel on the subcommittee, the investigations subcommittee. Oh, he said, yeah, there is. He said, yeah, we've got some candidates. And I said, oh, well, I would be interested in being a candidate. He said, well, we're looking for somebody who's got some, Hill experience. And I said, Peter, when you started here, did you have Hill experience? I said, how am I going to, and he kind of looked at me, and I said, give me a chance. So he sent me and another person who had Hill experience up. He said he got us both appointments with the chairman of the subcommittee, who was an elected member of Congress from New York City. And I went in for my interview, and I had been thinking ahead of time, why would somebody... I knew that this guy was he loved investigations, and he wasn't afraid of any high-ranking financial person in the administration, and he loved the idea of investigating any kinds of abuse of power at the financial agencies. So I thought to myself, what would he want to hear? And when I got into the room, I got a little closer to him physically in his space than he probably was used to, because he kind of considered himself a big, gruff person. And I said, Mr. Chairman, you're probably wondering why you should hire me. And he kind of looked at me like, yeah, but and I said, I'm not afraid of anything. Now I know so much more. I think I should have said I am afraid of everything, but I was kind of brash and young, and I said, I'm not afraid of anything, any kind of. And later I got a call from Peter Barish, who became my staff director, said, the chairman said to hire you. I said, okay. And interesting, I started out just right away with some major investigations. I had to learn a lot. I taught myself economic politics. I would go into the bathroom of my house and close the door and read the Wall Street Journal out loud so that it sounded like I knew the language, the jargon of economic policy. I just kind of read the big words out loud, so that I could go in and say liquidity, or some other word like that, and make it sound like I kind of knew what I was doing. And within about 6 months, you are way too young, but there was a huge collapse in the financial markets. The Hunt brothers down in Texas tried to corner silver, and the banks were collapsing and everything. And I was at lunch in the Rayburn cafeteria, and my staff director came up to me and he said, the chairman wants an investigation with the Hunt brothers. And in this whole thing, he wants this investigation. And I said, oh, golly, you got to tell him, Peter. I said, that's all these big agencies. That's the Federal Reserve, the SEC, all these agencies. I said, they're not going to come if Barbara Timmer calls him. He said, he's on his way over here. So the chairman comes in, he takes his tray, he sits down at the table, and he looks over, he said, I'd like an investigation of I want this whole thing. I want a series of hearings. I said, well, Mr. Chairman, I said, but it's going to take, it's going to take a number of weeks to get that lined up. He said, well, I'd like to start maybe, next Tuesday, if that's possible. And I said, well, Mr. Chairman, they're not going to come if Barbara Timmer calls them. He said, well, come up to my office. I'll call them. Oh, gee, okay. So we went up to his office, and he just called the Federal Reserve office and said, we need Chairman Volcker up here next Tuesday. We need so-and-so. We need so-and-so. and I just was taking notes, you know. And we had a series of hearings, and gradually I found out, and there are some books in which at one point my name is mentioned and described as neat, lean, and eager, which my friends in Washington never really let me live down. But I found out later that my chairman, Ben Rosenthal from New York City, who died of colon cancer a couple years later, he knew way more about the Hunt brothers and what they were doing with Saudi Arabia to buy silver secretly than I realized. He knew that the Hunt brothers were financiers of the John Birch Society, and that the Hunt brothers said that the John Birch Society said that a Jewish cabal ran secretly the economic system of the United States. And we got attacked. Our subcommittee got attacked. A lot of reporters were fed information, things happened, but Ben Rosenthal, we held our ground. The Hunt brothers, lawyers, went to another subcommittee in the House of Representatives while our hearings were going on. They went to a friendly committee, and that friendly committee set up a separate series of hearings at the same time. And I remember once, I was in the hallway of the Longworth building. I was kind of going to see if I could hear what was happening at this other hearing. And there was this really big guy in the hallway who was a lobbyist. I have been a lobbyist too, full disclosure. But anyway, he recognized me. I didn't recognize him. And he came up to me and he sort of asked me in kind of a menacing, anyway, he said, "Are you looking for another job?" He said, "You know, there's a vice president slot open at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange." And I said, "You know, you better not ever talk to me again." You know, I felt a little threatened. And I did have a reporter call me once and say, do you know, this is so-and-so. I said, well, how do you spell that? And he said, "You don't know my name?" And I said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I'm kind of new at the job." And he said, "Do you know about such and such?" And he told me about a book he'd written about, a reporter who'd been blown up in a car or something like that. And so that a Saturday or two later, I was working on Saturday, and I went back to the parking lot, and I got in the car and I thought, I wonder if somebody would blow me up. And I thought, you know something? I'm just going to turn the key. If they're blowing me, he did say, he said in general they don't like to do that to congressional staff because then there's a big investigation. I'm like, okay, good, in general. So I turned the key, nothing happened, I'm here today. But I remember thinking, okay, so I can keep going. And I had the opportunity to do a lot of big investigations. So there you go. What question was that? I can't even remember. Okay, sorry, a digression. Okay, now who else has got a question? And is it time for us to eat? Bon, fini.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Barbara's donation to us, about 1,000 items total, covering subjects like literature, history, politics, travel, translated classic works. Absolutely amazing. Over 300 hardcover books, over 400 paperbacks, multimedia as well. We're still processing the collection, the donation, but we're in the final stages. The items have been and looked at by people like art history professor Heidi Kraus. We had one of our student workers, Laure Bourret, go through them as well. I just want to say how significant this gift is to the library and to campus in general. France and other cultures absolutely should be on our minds and in our work as we strive to better understand and celebrate global differences and diversity. These donated items will help support interdisciplinary programs like the Paris Stories at Hope College, Professor Lauren Janes, and other interdisciplinary projects as well. This will not only help students who are majors in French, but across all disciplines. Once the pieces are fully processed and available, there will be record notes in the library catalog designating them as each item as a gift from Barbara Timmer. Additionally, each piece that will be added to our collection will have book plates noting that the book is a gift from Barbara Timmer, given in honor of her mother, Barbara D., who was also a Hope alumni. This is truly a fantastic gift from a person who has led an amazing, influential, and inspiring life. On behalf of the Van Wylen Library, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Well,